What Clint Eastwood did for this street artist will leave you speechless. He was just another face in the crowd, until he stopped in front of an art stall. On the bustling 16th Street Mall, in the heart of Denver, tourists and locals brushed past each other amid storefronts, street music, and hurried coffee runs. Among the hurried footsteps and distracted gazes, a man in a hat, walking calmly with attentive eyes, moved unnoticed. His name, Clint Eastwood. But that morning no one seemed to notice, or perhaps they just pretended not to. He walked like someone searching for something or maybe waiting to be surprised. And then he stopped. Before him stood a makeshift tent. A lone young woman, her short hair tucked under a colorful scarf, carefully arranging paintings framed in simple wood. The artworks, in muted tones and bold strokes, stood out against the lightness of their surroundings. Clint watched in silence. The artist noticed him but didn't react. Maybe she didn't recognize him, or maybe, at that moment, her mind was too busy trying to survive. What no one there knew was that this chance encounter would forever change that young artist's life. Nor that a simple black and white painting would become a symbol of hope for thousands. But before that, it was just another day, and he was just another face in the crowd. 2 months before that unlikely meeting, Emily Dawson was in a cold hospital room. Her eyes fixed on a random spot on the wall, trying to process the words she had just heard. Cancer. She was 26, a self-taught artist, living with her parents in a rented house on the outskirts of Denver. The diagnosis felt like a sentence, not just for her body, but for her family's emotional and financial stability. With no health insurance and the family's savings nearly depleted after the first rounds of chemotherapy, Emily found herself staring into an abyss. Her father, a mechanic, left unemployed after the pandemic, and her mother, a home caregiver, could barely pay rent. Medications, transportation, bills. Everything felt like a cruel game of impossible choices. And what strikes me most at this point in the story isn't the illness itself, but her choice. Emily decided to turn her pain into art. She took her paints, her canvases, and set up a small stall downtown. Not out of vanity or ambition, but out of necessity and dignity. That decision says everything about who she is. Even sick, exhausted, and helpless, she didn't beg for charity. She offered beauty. And to me, that's a strength almost beyond words. Every day, Emily woke early, wrapped her paintings in old sheets, and made her way to downtown Denver with a weary body and a stubborn heart. On the 16th Street Mall, she set up her stall under the unforgiving sun, arranged the canvases carefully, and sat waiting. Most people walked past without looking. Some turned their faces away. Others complimented but didn't buy. Emily smiled, even when her eyes were heavy with pain and fatigue. Amid the daily indifference, small victories emerged. An elderly woman bought a watercolor. A tourist took home a portrait. Rare were the days she earned enough to cover even a meal. And yet she kept coming back. Because every painting sold was another step toward healing, or at least toward the chance to try. Emily's persistence was quiet but fierce. She wasn't just selling art. She was fighting to survive. It was on a stifling Thursday afternoon that Brooke Sanders, a young freelance journalist, stopped at Emily's stall. Unlike others, she didn't walk past. She stayed. She observed. She asked questions. Emily, between one failed sale and another, told her story without drama, just the raw truth of someone trying not to fall apart. Brooke was moved. She took photos, asked for permission, and that same night, published an article on her personal blog. The artist who paints to live, literally. The piece was simple but brimming with humanity. Within hours, it began spreading. By the next day, it had exploded on social media. Suddenly, the once ignored stall became a point of curiosity. People wanted to meet the courageous artist, buy her work, help in any way they could. Emily's story had left anonymity behind, and was beginning to reach the world. The morning after the article went viral, Emily arrived at her stall to find a small line. People wanted to meet her, buy her art, take photos. She smiled, surprised but still wary of luck. Until, among the onlookers, A discreet man with slow steps and a serene gaze approached. Without fanfare, Clint Eastwood examined each painting as if reading pages of a diary. A deep silence fell. Just him, her, and the colors speaking for themselves. "Did you paint this?" he asked, pointing to a black and white canvas. Emily nodded, still in disbelief. Clint studied her for a moment and said, "This has soul." Then, without warning, he took out a check and wrote, $50,000. Emily froze. She tried to refuse, insisting the painting wasn't worth that much. But Clint was firm. "This isn't charity. It's recognition. Your art has already given me more than this money could ever repay." That sale, made in front of dozens of stunned onlookers, changed everything. People applauded. Emily cried. Clint simply smiled and left as he had arrived, in silence. Within minutes, her life was transformed. And it all started with a painting that carried pain but radiated hope. The story grew beyond anything Emily could have imagined. Clint Eastwood's gesture was caught on camera by a bystander, and within hours, the video was on every news outlet. The image of the young artist, overcome with emotion in front of the Hollywood icon, became a symbol of hope in hard times. Newspapers, radio shows, TV programs, and social media profiles recounted Emily's journey with reverence, not just for her illness, but for her courage to resist through art. Sales skyrocketed. People across the country wanted her paintings, even if just reproductions. Anonymous donations poured in. A local hospital offered to cover the rest of her treatment. Medical bills were paid one by one. For the first time in many months, Emily could finally take a deep breath. With a body still fragile but a soul renewed, she faced her final chemotherapy sessions with a different gaze. No longer one of fear, but of gratitude. The silence of the hospital's early mornings no longer felt so cruel. She was no longer alone. The street stall was taken down, not out of surrender, but victory. Emily was ready for her next chapter. And now, the whole world waited to see where her art would take her. Weeks after her last chemo session, Emily woke to find a letter in her hands. The plain envelope with no return address bore only a signature at the bottom. Clint Eastwood. The handwritten words were direct and sincere. He spoke of the strength he saw in her art, how that painting had moved him deeply, not for its technique but for its truth. "Keep painting, Emily. The world needs stories like yours, told with courage and silence." Tears in her eyes and a quiet smile, she tucked the letter into her journal and picked up her brushes again. Not to survive this time but to express. Canvases began to multiply in her new studio, now set up in the back of a small Denver art gallery that had offered her first official exhibition. The opening was scheduled for late autumn. Guests, press, locals, and even past buyers confirmed their attendance. But at the center of it all stood her, the girl who once sold art on the street with a sick body and a soul at war. And on that white wall, right beside the entrance, hung the black and white piece. Sometimes the greatest miracle comes from a silent gesture. And so, between brushstrokes of pain and traces of hope, a simple street stall became a stage for redemption. Not just for Emily, but for everyone who still believes in the beauty of quiet acts. This story isn't just about overcoming. It's about art as resistance. About how, even on the darkest days, a single spark, sometimes from where you least expect, can reignite everything. Now, imagine how many Emilys are out there, invisible, waiting for someone to pause in front of their stall. If this story touched you, help it reach more hearts. Like, share it with someone who needs inspiration today. And of course, subscribe so you won't miss more real, emotional narratives like this one. Because here, every story we tell is a reminder. Life can be hard, but it still hides miracles in the details. See you in the next chapter.